Good day. My name is Emily Brennan, and I will be presenting on my article review 2. The title of the article is Racial Differences in the Built Environment Body Mass Index Relationship, a Geospatial Analysis of the Adolescents in Urban Neighborhoods. To start with, I will discuss a brief background. In the U.S., racial ethnic minority adolescents have high obesity rates. This includes blacks and Hispanics. Globally, adolescent obesity is one of today's most pressing issues, or public health issues, often marked by persistent racial ethnic disparities. Though racial and ethnic disparities in obesity have been documented for well over half a century, the determinants of this variation remain elusive. Neighborhood-built environments have features that promote energy intake and expenditure. An example of this is negative energy balance, shown here in the picture to the right, where energy expenditure is higher than energy intake and therefore tips the balance scale to where we would likely lose body mass. Now I will briefly discuss the problem/issue as mentioned in the article and that this paper seeks to investigate. Since little research has investigated the relationships between BMI and built environment features in adolescence, the goal of this paper is to investigate these spatial relationships using geospatial analysis techniques. A secondary goal is to evaluate results sensitivity. It is possible that aggregate models can mask important relationships for certain population subgroups and increase likelihood of non-significant findings. So a little bit of information about the data and methods. This survey consisted of 9th through 12th grade students within the Boston Public School system, taken from a 2008 Boston Youth Survey. This survey excludes religious, private, and other school types. It consisted of 1,034 students. To continue on with the methods, addresses were geocoded using street intersection, assigned latitude and longitude, and used Esri address locator. These results were imported into the Google Maps, and the authors manually placed the verified points for processing into ArcMap. They also used NAD 1983 to include various built environment features into ArcGIS geospatial database. Recreational open spaces and public transit data come from MassGIS. Park data comes from Esri data and maps. And retail service and cultural/educational walking destinations come from InfoUSA. BMI was calculated using CDC growth charts and converted to z-scores to account for gender norms and age. A BMI z-score is used because it is a more appropriate measure of adiposity than just BMI for adolescents. Neighborhood-level covariates were interpolated using census blocks. Exploratory spatial analysis was conducted using geovisualization and cluster detection in ArcGIS. JINX was used to determine the best grouping of values in the data to reduce variation within classes while maximizing variance between classes. K-nearest neighbor and optimal suggestions from the literature review and Monte Carlo simulations were used. If ordinary least squares had a significant spatial autocorrelation, then the authors applied a spatial econometric approach for spatial regression modeling. For JINX, the natural breaks classification was used, and the authors also used global Moran's eye. All analysis of data was performed in R. Now, I will briefly mention some results as listed in the article. The authors found that 33.17% of adolescents were classified as overweight or obese. They statistically confirmed a strong positive spatial autocorrelation in built environment features using global Moran's eye. No significant spatial patterns existed in BMI z-scores across neighborhoods. And finally, they found significant positive spatial autocorrelation in ordinary least squares regression residuals, indicating an association between the built environment features and BMI z-scores. Some conclusions of this study are that the authors found significant positive spatial autocorrelation in built environment features, but not in BMI z-score. The built environment variables did not explain much of the variability in standardized BMI among adolescent or racial disparities in adolescent obesity, but there are some differences in these relationships by race ethnicity. and most built environment features were not associated with BMI z-scores. A strength and novelty of the study is using individual level geocoded residential addresses as opposed to large administrative areas. The authors also used global spatial autocorrelation, which may not exist if there is highly localized clustering. A surprising result was to find density of parks may be associated with higher BMI levels among Black adolescents, as parks generally are thought to be locations for increased and varying physical activities. Racial segregation in Boston could explain parks being in worse conditions and therefore making them unsafe, and unattractive to use. Finally, I want to discuss some evaluation critiques of the article. For a future study, it would be interesting to see a sort of continuation of this study to find if local patterns in BMI exist, as it was beyond the scope of this present study. I think I would have liked to see this study use similar scales and zones for the buffer like previous studies in the literature review found, because it makes it difficult to compare the study's findings with previous ones. I think the biggest strength is the handling of the MAUP or MAUP issue, and one of the biggest weaknesses was the small subgroup size of racial ethnic minorities. This could explain the conclusion that Blacks are less likely to use the built environment features like parks. Okay, and this slide is just my reference to the present article reviewed. And thank you very much for listening. And I appreciate your time watching this video.